Hey everyone, Eric Hayden here on YouTube. Haven't been on for a long time. The last video we did was a couple weeks ago when we were anticipating a hard freeze. This video we're going to talk about what's going on behind me. Today is the last day of March. We're going to show you some of the limited damage we had after some hard freezes. We're going to talk a little bit about pruning, something I haven't really done so far this spring. I'm woefully behind on that. And we're going to show you the first blooms of the season. Not from potted roses, not from something I got in the mail, the first blooms of the season. This is many, many weeks ahead of schedule, and we'll jump to that right now. All right, here it is, Dublin Bay, our first bloom of 2023. This is a climbing rose. I pruned it a little bit in the fall of last year, but kind of let it go this spring. So you can see it's already pretty big. This is a climbing rose that was planted a couple years ago. Usually our hybrid teas bloom sometime about the first or second week of May and peak the third and fourth week of May. These climbing roses tend to bloom a little quicker. This one specifically doesn't have as many petals. If you have a rose that has a lot of petals, it tends to take longer to open up. This is, I don't know what the petal count is on it, but it's pretty on the low side. So that's why it's one of the first bloomers. But this is March 31st, and this is already blooming. Usually the earliest this blooms is maybe mid to late April, so many, many weeks ahead of schedule. The other thing that's ahead of schedule, the black spot. I like to do these YouTube videos. I laugh at some of the comments. One gentleman recently said how terrible my soil was. You just have to laugh at some of those comments because this is real world right here. I've got 3 kids, work, and life happens, so sometimes you just don't do what you need to do. So I have not sprayed this winter. I'm going to prune some of this back so it doesn't matter as much, and that's why I already have black spot. And for my friends up in New York, again, hard to imagine we're talking blooms here the last day of March, and really this happened a couple days ago. And you can tell, even despite the wind, that it's just in the first 5% of the bush itself. Still a lot more buds to go, and this will be more prolific in terms of blooms as we head through the month of April and certainly May. In the last video, I talked about a hard freeze. We had about a week and a half ago or so, temperatures got down to 22 degrees. And I tell my friends up north that I never lost so many roses during the winter or spring as I did here in North Carolina. I used to live in upstate New York. We would plant the roses and frequently get not only into the single digits, but often below 0. But they were dormant in the wintertime. We would winter protect them. And while they were very short coming out of the winter, and what I mean by that is a lot of them died back down right near the ground and really only stayed alive where we had winter protection. I might only have 2, 4, maybe 8-inch canes coming out of the ground in the spring. I never really lost a rose because of winter kill. Here in North Carolina, yes, we're ahead of schedule this year, but you can see these roses are gigantic. This Hot Princess back here is 7.5 feet tall. That's with a light pruning in the fall to lower them. And you can see that the roses are quite healthy. I mentioned we've got some black spot, but this is Mr. Caleb. In the back here, Pope John Paul II, looking really, really good. Again, outside of some of that black spot. And you can see we're probably over 9 feet. This Yolande de Aragon. Here's Mr. Lincoln. And then Alina. I mean, this is gigantic. Probably a good 3 or 4 feet wide and just over 6 feet tall. This is March 31st. So again, we don't lose a lot of the bush in the winter here in North Carolina. Instead, what happens is we can have these late freezes. We were very, very warm in February. The first week of March, we were in the 70s and 80s. And some of it's tempered because we live 3 miles from the ocean. So some days that are in the 80s inland, I'm struggling to reach 70 degrees because water keeps us cooler. But when we got down to 22 the other morning, I thought I was going to have a lot of issues. I'll show you some freeze issues now, but for the most part, we survived that freeze just fine. So I went all around the garden trying to find freeze damage, and I can't really explain why we didn't have more issues. In the past, when we were leafed out like this because of a warm spring, we would have major damage when temperatures dropped, not just below freezing, but especially in the mid-20s. You see a little bit of this, the leaves are curled on the end. That's some freeze damage. That's just not an issue. But for the most part, very little, I'd say less than 2% of the leaves had any type of freeze damage from those temperatures in the mid-20s. And that's very, very lucky, because we are, as I showed you with the Dublin Bay, weeks and weeks ahead of schedule. Now, we did have some winter dieback because of some of those cold snaps. You can see some there on that is Veterans Honor and Randy Scott. So it's not to say we didn't have some damage, but for the most part, a lot of this tender new vegetation was okay. Really don't have an explanation for that, because we got pretty cold, and that is definitely tender vegetation. To my last point on pruning, traditionally we do it here the last week of February, first week or two of March. I just kind of let things go. I should have at least sprayed. That's definitely, each year I said, you know, I should start earlier and earlier. But the reason why I let the pruning go is if we had that hard freeze and we had some damage on the top, I would just prune that out. So over the next couple weeks, I will lower these bushes. I'm not too worried about the black spot. I'm gonna cut some of these back. I'm going to start spraying, and then my April and May cycles should get going. I mentioned I have disease. Again, I did not spray all winter, so with the good of a mild winter comes the bad of black spot. That has started in earnest. And yes, in an ideal world, you would spray during the winter down south so that you don't start off this spring with something like this. The problem is, once it starts like this, it's an uphill battle all year. Had I sprayed at least once a month in the winter months and maybe pruned some of this out already, I would be starting with basically a clean slate, and that's much easier. It's much easier to stay atop of disease before it starts than once it takes hold in your garden. The other thing I'm noticing, this is a Firm. It's a magnet for powdery mildew. So that white you see on the rows, that is powdery mildew. But again, this is what it is. I'm going to remove some of these leaves, clean up this garden, and if I strip some leaves and do some pruning, we're right in line with the peak in terms of growth, April and May, things getting going. So I'll get caught up, no problem at all. If I had to do it over again, yes, I'd spray earlier, but it is what it is. We'll get that, you know, taken care of here pretty soon. So that's it in the garden. Things do look good growth-wise. As you could see, I do have a little spraying and some light pruning to do. We'll leave you with one of the newest bushes planted last year that's looking very good. Ring of Fire. It's looking like an outstanding rose. I did mound up some soil over the bud union. That's where the variety is grafted. This graft is usually above the ground here down south on Fortuniana, but I covered it up for the winter because it tends to be on the tender side. Hope everyone's doing well. We'll jump into April. Look for some more videos. As the roses start blooming, you will see a lot more from me here in the coming weeks, and certainly by the latter part of April and May. Hope everyone's doing well. As always, I do appreciate the comments. As always, appreciate you following. Take care, everyone.